Well, some people would call it hoodie weather. I call it football weather. 60 degrees this morning in beautiful Augusta, Georgia. Probably my favorite time of the year weather-wise here. And it doesn't last long either. We get a few weeks of this. But anyway, nobody cares about that. What they do care about, getting mad at people's top 25 rankings. So I'm going to do you a favor today, and I'm going to put one out. This is going to be my week 2 college football top 25 ranking for the 2024 season, following week 1 of the college football season, heading into week 2. Per usual, I'm going to put my top 25 up on the screen. In fact, I'll do it right now. There it is. And I'm going to go through the list and do my best to explain to you why I have teams ranked where I do. I get the, I hear complaints all the time about the AP and other rankings that they don't know why this team is there or that team there, whatever. I try to explain my rankings, not because I expect everybody to agree with me on my top 25. Obviously, that's not going to happen. But at least I'm providing an explanation, my thought process, why I have, certain teams where I do. I'll also tell you, and you can click back and watch. Normally, I do this top 25 every Monday during the season. This week's a little bit different because it's week 1, Labor Day. You had games on Sunday and Monday, so I'm doing it Wednesday. Normally, this comes out on Mondays. You can click back and watch last week's top 25, but I'm going to tell you as I talk about each team, whether they moved up, down, where they're at that last week, that kind of thing. All right, we'll start at the top, work the way down. I have swapped Georgia and Ohio State. I've had Ohio State number 1 in my ranking in all 3 of my preseason rankings, February, May, and August. I did 3 preseason top 25s. Ohio State was number 1 in all 3 of them. Ohio State was number 1 after week 0, heading into week 1, and I have flip-flopped them. And the reason is simple. I say this all the time in the first month of the season. The biggest changes in someone's top 25 or ranking, in my opinion, should take place early in the season when you actually start seeing teams play. The later the season goes along, the less changes you should need to make to your top 25 because you're more familiar with where teams should properly be ranked. Do I think all of a sudden Georgia is now better than Ohio State, whereas I didn't think that last week? I don't know who's better between the two, but what I do know is that Georgia beat a top 25 team 34-3, and Ohio State beat Akron. Now, Ohio State did what they were supposed to do. They blew them out. They beat them 52-6. And while some people complained about a slow start from Ohio State, the final score was 52-6. I mean, that's what you're supposed to do when you play those types of teams. I'm not punishing Ohio State at all. The reality is Georgia played better competition and dominated the game 34-3. It makes sense to me to flip-flop those two for this week. Now, that could change. Ohio State's got some big games coming up. Maybe they get a win that would give them a bigger win than Georgia, and maybe I decide to put Ohio State back on, or some other team for that matter. But I think the right thing to do for right now, based off of what we know about, during the preseason and the rosters and the coaching staffs and all that, I had Ohio State number 1. Now we've seen a week of football. Georgia beat a top 25 team. I flip-flopped them. It's literally that simple for me. Georgia beat Clemson 34-3. Ohio State beat Akron 52-6. This week, Georgia plays Tennessee Tech, a nothing game, so there's nothing Georgia can do this week to impress anybody, myself included. And Ohio State plays Western Michigan. Nothing they can do to impress anybody this week, myself included. Georgia and Ohio State should both go out this week, dominate these teams in the first half, and play a lot of backups and third-string guys in the second half to start developing and getting some young players some experience. None of those games should be worth watching. At number 3 this week, I've got Texas, and they're up a spot. I've had Texas at 4. I've moved them up to 3. The reason for that is not necessarily anything Texas did. They played Colorado State and beat them 52-0. That's what you're supposed to do against a team like Colorado State. We'll obviously find out a lot more about Texas this week because they play on the road at Michigan. The reason Texas moved up to number 3 is because I have had Oregon at number 3 for my last couple of rankings for this year that I've done, and Oregon was very unimpressive against North Dakota State. They just did not look good. They seemed disjointed offensively. They put up a ton of yards, Oregon did. I know I'm skipping around a little here, but I got to explain why I dropped Oregon all the way down to 9, as you can see here. They looked disjointed. They had 500 yards of total offense, which is great, but only managed 24 points. They gave up 14. They seemed to struggle along the lines of scrimmage at times. It was just a very head-scratching game for Oregon. Now, they play Boise State this week, which is a group of 5 team. It's one of the better group of 5 teams, but it's still a group of 5 team. I expect Oregon to get it together in week 2 and go out and dominate Boise State, beat them by 2 or 3 scores at least. If not, there could be some serious concerns for Oregon heading into Big Ten play. Maybe turns out they might have been a little overrated or overhyped. I don't know that for certain yet. Maybe it was just one bad outing, whatever. I'm not giving them the benefit of the doubt because I dropped them from 3 all the way to 9, but I'm not yet convinced they're a terrible team. They're not Florida State, right? Florida State was ranked. I think the AP had Florida State at 10. I had them at 16. They're completely out of my ranking now. They should be out of everyone's ranking. It's pretty obvious they were just terrible. I'm not convinced Oregon's terrible, but it is concerning. 24-10 against against a lower classification school like that for a team as talented as Oregon is unacceptable. Dropped them to 9. Had Texas at 4. So really just by default, Texas moved up. Again, Texas didn't do anything wrong. They did what they were supposed to do, and we'll find more out about them this week on the road at Michigan. Now, Alabama and Notre Dame, let me explain what I did here. If you go back and you look at my previous ranking, I mentioned I had Oregon 3, Texas 4, moved Texas up, Oregon down to 9. So Notre Dame at 5 in my last ranking would have been the next team in line to move up. And Notre Dame had a good win on the road at Texas A&M. One of the best 3 or 4 wins of the weekend was Notre Dame, a 10-point win against Texas A&M on the road, hostile environment, the whole deal. Here, 2 issues here. Number 1, I don't think Texas A&M should have been ranked. I didn't have them ranked. I don't remember the last time. 2020 was the last time they were any good. They've got a brand new coaching staff. I'm not high on Connor Wegman, and he showed why in this game against Notre Dame. So, the AP or the coaches or you watching that may think higher of Texas A&M than I do may be giving Notre Dame a lot more credit than I am for beating Texas A&M, even though I am giving them credit. That's probably the second, third, fourth, whatever you want to say, most impressive win of the weekend. But that's one of the reasons I didn't move them up. I didn't have Texas A&M ranked. I don't think Texas A&M is a great team. I think they're about the 8th or 9th best team in the SEC. The other reason I didn't move them up is because it's impossible for Notre Dame to finish the season in the top 4. It just is. They cannot earn a top 4 seed in the playoffs. They could go 12-0 and beat everybody they play by 100 points. And when the final playoff ranking comes out, they're going to be 5th. Because they're not in a conference. The only way to finish 1 through 4 in the final playoff rankings is to win your conference. And because there's no possible way for Notre Dame to be able to do that, I'm never moving them higher than 5. They need to join a conference. It's 2024, not 1984. Been down that road. Don't need to go there again. Now, I've got 3 SEC teams in the top 4, and you're thinking, well, only one SEC team can earn a top 4 seed. So why don't you apply that Notre Dame logic to that and only have one SEC team in your top 4? My answer to that is, yes, only one SEC team can finish in the top 4. I don't know which one that's going to be. I don't know who's winning the SEC. Maybe it's Georgia. Maybe it's Texas. Maybe it's Bama. Maybe it's Ole Miss. Maybe it's Mizzou. I don't know. So I'm putting the teams in there that at least have a chance to finish within the top 4. Notre Dame doesn't have a chance. So they're never moving higher than 5 in my ranking. Doesn't mean I necessarily think they're the 5th best team. Just means I'm never putting them higher than 5 because they're making a conscious decision not to join a conference. I'm not going to reward that decision with a top 4 ranking. I've got Notre Dame at 5. They obviously went on the road and beat Texas A&M by 10. I thought their secondary especially was unbelievable. Defense overall played really, really good. And I like the running game, including what Riley Leonard gives them through the running game. Love is an amazing running back. Even Price, I thought, had a pretty good game. They're number 2. I'm still not convinced Notre Dame has the ability to throw the ball or match up against elite talent on the outside. They keep telling me they've got all these great wide receivers and that Marcus Freeman has upgraded the wide receiver room over what Brian Kelly had, but they really struggled to throw the ball in this game. So not a knock on Notre Dame, just my observations about them. I look, I've got Notre Dame at 5. Obviously, they're pretty good, so I don't think any Notre Dame fans should be that mad at me. I've got Ole Miss at 6. That's up 1 spot. They're up 1 spot because I dropped Oregon. What Ole Miss did this past weekend means absolutely nothing to me. They beat Furman 76-0. There's probably 10 or 15 teams at least in the country that could beat Furman 76-0 if they wanted to. There's teams that could beat them 176-0 if they just wanted to score on every play. I'm not saying Ole Miss did anything wrong. I'm not saying they looked bad. They looked great, but it was against Furman. Okay. And I've talked a lot about this the last couple of days. A lot of these highly rated teams played absolute cans of corn this past weekend and beat them by 50, 60, and in some cases 70 points. That doesn't change my mind on those teams that I already had highly ranked. I had Ole Miss ranked 7 before they ever played a game. Am I supposed to move them up because they won 76-0 against Furman? No, I already thought they were really good. They're going to have to play some more legitimate competition down the road in order for me to get a more accurate gauge of where they're at versus some of these better teams. But I've got them as a top 10 team. I think they're a playoff contender. I think they're a contender to win the SEC. So this is where I have them. They play Middle Tennessee State this weekend. So again, not really an opportunity to prove much of anything to anybody there. But I've got them at number 6. I moved Utah up to 7. I had them at 10. So they're up 3 spots. A couple of reasons for that. They jumped Oklahoma State and Michigan and Oregon. Already told you why I dropping Oregon down. They just not a good performance this past weekend. Same thing for Michigan. I was not impressed with Michigan against Fresno State. They appear to have a mess on their hands at the quarterback position. Orji was the assumed sort of heir apparent to J.J. McCarthy. I didn't think he looked good throwing the ball last season in a backup role. I didn't think he looked good this spring. Michigan agreed. They gave Warren the start. He didn't look great either. Donovan Edwards is on a milk carton. The guy had like 11 carries for whatever it was, 11 carries for the 30 yards. It wasn't good. They were disjointed. They ended up winning comfortably in the end. If you just look at the final score ended up being 30-10, but this was a one-score game in the second half. Just a sloppy overall performance by Michigan against a decent Fresno State team, a team that's used to playing Power 5 competition. Fresno State is. They play a lot of Pac-12 teams, or used to when the Pac-12 existed. But like Texas, we'll find out about Michigan this week because they host Texas, right? So I had Michigan at number 8. I left Michigan at number 8, but I moved Utah ahead of them when I moved Oregon down instead of moving Michigan up, because I just don't feel like Michigan played well enough this week against Fresno State to warrant being moved up. Whereas I thought Utah looked better, honestly, in week 1. Cam Rising back after missing all of last year, had a really good game. I thought Utah played well and deserved to move up. They beat Southern Utah 49-0. Now, again, does it tell us anything about Utah? That's what a really good team is supposed to do against somebody like Southern Utah. But Michigan 30-3 over Fresno State, or, Utah 49-0 over Southern Utah. I got to move one of them up because Oregon fell. I put Utah at 7, Michigan at 8, Oregon at 9. Been over that already. Penn State, I've got at 10. That's up 2 spots. I think they also had one of the best 4 or 5 wins over the weekend. Though, look, the reality is there just wasn't a lot of Power 5 versus Power 5 games this weekend. So you might hear me go, oh, Penn State had one of the most 4 or 5 impressive wins, and then in your mind you're thinking, well, they beat West Virginia, and I don't think West Virginia is any good. Well, they're a Power 5 team at least. Not very many Power 5 teams beat Power 5 teams this weekend because not very many Power 5 teams played Power 5 teams this weekend. As fans, we always ask these teams to schedule more of these games early in the season. So when they do and they win, we have to reward them. So that's what I'm doing for Penn State here. I think Drew Allard looked amazing. Penn State's defense is the real deal again. Nick Singleton's a beast at running back. And they put a whooping on West Virginia without Julian Fleming catching a single pass, which was sort of their prize transfer portal win from this offseason. Receiver from Ohio State, that wide receiver for Penn State, Wallace, went off for over 100 yards. If they can get Julian Fleming added to that mix at wide receiver and get to a point where they've got 2 weapons at wide receiver to go along with what Drew Allard can do and Nick Singleton at running back, Penn State could have one of the best offenses they've had in a while, and I don't think anybody doubts their ability to play defense. I think Penn State looked really good on the road against West Virginia, winning 34-12. I've moved them up from 12 into my top 10 at number 10. Miami is another team that made a big jump this week in my rankings. I had them at 14 heading into this past week. They, of course, put an absolute beat down on Florida. And again, you can tell me till you're blue in the face how bad Florida is, and I agree with you. But you know who else is bad? Akron, Colorado State, Western Kentucky, who Alabama beat 63-0. Furman, who Ole Miss beat 76-0. Idaho is bad. Oregon beat them 24-14. Murray State is bad. Missouri beat them 51-0. Fresno State. Anyway, you go on down the list. So, yeah, Florida's bad. So Miami did what a good team is supposed to do when they play a bad team. In the case of Miami, they did it against a bad Power 5 team, whereas a lot of these other teams were beating up on FCS or low-level Group of 5 teams. So you got to credit Miami for winning this game. And not just, again, remember, Miami was only a 2.5-point favorite. They went out and blew Miami out 41-17, and it could have been 56-17. I mean, they completely dominated that game. So as far as who's winning the Miami argument early in the season, me or the people in my comment section, it's me. I picked Miami to win the ACC in the preseason, and boy, I got absolutely murdered in the comment section. And the only real argument or pushback that I got from anybody was, well, they've been in the ACC for 20 years and they've never won it. You know, well, that's like saying you're not going to bet on red in roulette because it hit red last time. Every spin is individual is separate from the spin before it. Each spin is its own spin and has nothing to do with the spin before it. That might be the case here with Miami as far as their previous seasons in the ACC, with Florida State circling the drain, Clemson already taking a big loss to Georgia. Miami looks like the best team in the ACC. I've got them the highest ranked team in the ACC. I've got them at number 11. Kansas State, I've got it 12. That's down one spot from last week. Not because they did anything wrong. It's because of how impressed I was with Miami's win over Florida. If you look at Kansas State, I've got it pulled up here. UT Martin 41-6. So, you know, they've got a new quarterback, that Avery Johnson, I think his name is, Dylan Edwards, running back in from Colorado. They're going to have a good offense. The defense played well, limiting a terrible UT Martin team to 6 points. But again, so they did what they were supposed to do, not punishing Kansas State. Again, I had them at 11. Here I have them at 12. It's because I moved Miami up. We'll see what Kansas State does going forward. A little bit tougher competition this week on the road at Tulane, and then they'll get into conference play in the Big 12 here over the next few weeks. Tennessee up to 13. I thought about moving Tennessee ahead of Kansas State. I really did. Would I pick Kansas State to beat Tennessee? Probably not, but this isn't a power rating. This is a ranking of where I feel like teams deserve to be ranked right now in the season. Tennessee also beat the soul out of a nobody this past weekend, 69-3. They beat Chattanooga. Nico looked great, over 300 yards passing in the first half. They have an opportunity this week to pass not just Kansas State, but probably several teams. They play NC State. I don't think NC State is great. I almost dropped them out of my rankings altogether this week, even though they won this past week. They looked terrible against Western Carolina. I had NC State at 19 before this past weekend. They beat Western Carolina. It wasn't pretty. It didn't look good. They 24 in the AP poll. They dropped all the way to 24 in the AP poll, but they won 38-21. It was a dogfight into the fourth quarter. They did not look good. NC State's only hope for this Tennessee game is that they got caught looking ahead to the Tennessee game. If anything similar to the NC State shows up in Charlotte this Saturday to play Tennessee, Tennessee will beat them by 30 or 40 points. They're in danger of really getting ran out of the building here if they don't get it turned around quick, fast, and in a hurry. So I dropped them all the way down to 25. We'll see. Tennessee, if they beat NC State, will probably move up a couple of spots, probably move ahead of Kansas State. Kansas State plays Tulane, but obviously Tennessee beating NC State this week would be more impressive than Kansas State beating Tulane. I have to wait and see what the final scores are, but probably going to move up next week, maybe even into the top 10, depending on what happens with some of the teams ahead of them. So I've got Tennessee at 13. They looked really good this past week. At 14, I've got Missouri. Similar story to a lot of these top 20 teams. They blew out a nobody. So you sit down and you go, okay, what do I do with that? I already had Missouri ranked really high. I had them at 13. Am I supposed to reward them for blowing out Murray State? Am I supposed to punish them? Well, I decided to do neither. I flip-flopped them and Tennessee because honestly, at this point, I just feel like Tennessee is probably a little bit better of a team. In fact, Tennessee kind of reminds me of last year's Missouri team a little bit. They're going to have a really good defense. That's hard for a lot of people to believe with Tennessee. I've got some questions about their secondary, but their front seven, I think, is elite. They've got a really good ground game. Dylan Sampson had a great game, too. No one talks about it because they're just talking about Nico. If Tennessee's offensive line can hold up and Tennessee's secondary can hold up, they're good to go at quarterback, wide receiver, running back, and front seven on defense to compete and possibly beat anybody they play. So I decided to move them ahead of Missouri. Missouri's got the same quarterback they had last year, and they got Luther Burden back, but they lost their running back. They lost their defensive coordinator. Now, again, none of that showed up this week in a game against a terrible Murray State team. But I just feel like at this point, Tennessee's probably a couple of steps further down the road for this season than Missouri is, keeping in mind that Missouri not only beat Tennessee last year, absolutely blew them out. Just absolutely destroyed them. So we'll see what happens with these two teams over the course of the next few weeks. But Tennessee 13, Missouri 14. Tennessee, of course, plays NC State this week. Missouri, who does Missouri play this week? Let's find, where are they at on here? Missouri plays Buffalo. The AP has Missouri in the top 10. Well, I'm not going to say. If you think Missouri is one of the best 10 teams in the country, I think you're football ignorant. I really do. Now, I understand an argument for putting Missouri in the top 10. Maybe if you're ranking your teams based on what you think their final record is going to be. Because when you look at Missouri's schedule, through dumb luck, they avoid most of the top tier teams in the SEC. They do have to play Oklahoma, and they do have to play Bama. They don't play Ole Miss. They don't play Tennessee. They don't play Georgia. They don't play Texas. So if you're putting Missouri in the top 10 like the AP is because you think they're going to finish 10-2, and in your mind, a 10-2 team should be ranked in the top 10. I disagree with that entire philosophy. I don't think you should rank teams based on what you think their final record will be. That's not what I do. I rank teams based on what I've seen so far. It's like a combination of where they should be ranked versus where they deserve to be ranked type of thing. I do not think Missouri is one of the best 10 teams in the country, though. I don't. But, the AP does. They've got them at number 9. I've got Missouri at 14. I think Missouri is really good, but I don't think they're one of the best 10 teams. Oklahoma State, I've got at 15. I had to drop them a little bit, too. I had them at number 9. I was way higher on Oklahoma State in the preseason than almost anybody else was. I picked them to win the Big 12. And while I still think they have a chance to win the Big 12, I've got some serious concerns about Oklahoma State already after week 1. And my issue is the two concerns I had about Oklahoma State heading into the season showed up in this first game. The competition wasn't great. They played South Dakota State. Now, they're a really good FCS program. In fact, I think they won the FCS national title last year. But they're an FCS program. And when we're talking about Oklahoma State, we're talking about a top 15, top 20 team, a team that's picked to compete to win a Power 5 conference. So no matter how good of an FCS team they're playing, they should handle them, okay? And they scored 44 points. Have no problem with that. But they gave up 20. And so the two concerns I had about Oklahoma State heading into the season were their defense, because that's what let them down last year, and Ollie Gordon. And what I mean when I say Ollie, look, I don't have any concerns about Ollie Gordon's ability. He's one of the best running backs in the country. But they ran him into the ground last year. They're too reliant on him. And against this, in week 1, against an FCS opponent, he had over 25 carries. There's a reason the overwhelming majority of college football teams, running backs, don't get anywhere near that number of carries anymore in college football. It has to do with longevity, the overall health of the player in the long run, what may or may, how long he may or may not last in the NFL. You can look at a running back like you look at a set of tires. There's only so much tread on a tire. No matter what you do to it, no matter how good of shape you try to keep your tires in on your car, there's only so many miles on those tires, all right? And if you spend 8 hours a day driving around town, it's going to wear those tires out a lot quicker than if you keep it in the garage and only drive it on Sundays. Oklahoma State is driving Ollie Gordon for 8 hours a day with the tire analogy. 25 plus carries a game, I don't like that. I don't think that's sustainable over the course of the season. And the problem if you're Oklahoma State is if you lose Ollie Gordon, there's a lot of teams that suddenly can beat you that maybe with Ollie Gordon don't have a chance. And, of course, the defense, it didn't look to me like it had improved all that much from last year. I still think they have a chance to win the Big 12. I mean, Utah, Arizona, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, Central Florida, I think could be kind of a wild card. But I'm kind of more concerned about Oklahoma State after week 1 than I was before, because I was hoping they weren't going to do that with Ollie Gordon, and I was hoping the defense would be a little bit better, and it didn't appear to be, at least through week 1. Now, we'll find out a lot more about them this week. They play Arkansas. Arkansas is another one of these teams that played a nobody and put up 70. Now, nobody wants to put Arkansas in the top 10, which, Tennessee should be in the top 10 because they beat Chattanooga 69-3 and Nico had 300 yards, or Ole Miss should be ranked in the top 2 because they put up 70-something points on Furman. Well, do you think Arkansas should be up there too? I mean, they won 70-0. Anyway, I don't have them ranked. I didn't have them ranked last week. I don't have them ranked now. They beat a terrible team 70-0, or whatever the score was. They beat somebody 70-0 last year, or 56-7, or something like that in week 1. So these week 1 games against these lower classification schools where these kind of mid to below average teams run up the score, it just doesn't really mean anything to me. I need to see them play legitimate competition. So if you're an Arkansas fan and you're mad at me for saying those things about Arkansas, okay, I get it. Beat Oklahoma State and you'll shut everybody up, myself included. And so we'll see. That should be a good game this weekend, Oklahoma State versus Arkansas, but I've got them at top 15, or number 15, so that's my top 15 there. Oklahoma, I've got at 16. That's up 1 spot from 17. I had Clemson at 16. Obviously, Clemson lost, so I bumped them down a few spots to 23. So therefore, Oklahoma moved up. Again, I'm not rewarding Oklahoma for beating Temple. You're supposed to beat Temple. Heard a lot of people say, "Oh, held Temple to 3 points. We told you about the defense, Lou." you shut somebody out in week 1 last year, and your defense ended up being garbage. Again, it doesn't mean your defense will be garbage this year, but holding Temple to 3 points doesn't mean it'll be good either. Okay? Get into some Power 5 competition, get into SEC play, see how the defense holds up. You got Tennessee coming to town in 3 or 4 weeks. Okay? Trust me. You'll find out about your defense then. Everyone will. So if Oklahoma is right, then they'll handle Tennessee at home, right? If they're not, they'll give up 40 to Tennessee and they'll lose. I wonder which way that's going to go. But Oklahoma plays Houston this week. I know that's a Power 5 opponent, but my God, Houston is bad. Houston is somehow worse now that they're in the Power 5 than they were before. They are really, really bad. Oklahoma should blow them out. I've got them at 16. Louisville, I moved up to 17. I'm tired of disrespecting Louisville. I've been doing it for 2 straight years. I watched them win last year, week after week after week. I never moved them up. I watched them play for the ACC championship game, didn't move them up. All offseason when I talked about the ACC, I talked about Miami, Florida State, Clemson, NC State, Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, all more than Louisville in terms of winning the ACC. I don't know why I keep doing this. I don't know why everybody else keeps doing it, too. It's like Louisville's like the invisible man. No one sees them. No one talks about them. They reloaded again. Brom proved he's a great head coach, or maybe not a great head coach, but a good head coach last year when he took them to the ACC championship game in his first year. I don't know what else they can do. They beat Austin Peay 62-0. Again, that's what a good team should do, right? I had them 20th. I moved them up to 17th. They should probably be a little bit higher based on, what they did last year, what came back, coaching staff intact. Plus, take a look at their schedule. There ain't a lot of landmines there. The whole Louisville thing is weird to me. Now, they did lose to Kentucky, which was a bad look last year and all that. So I guess there's some arguments to be made on either side. But I've been extremely disrespectful in where I've been ranking Louisville last year and leading into this year. So I moved them up to 17. I've got Southern Cal at 18. I had them unranked. I am so up in the air on Southern Cal and LSU, I can't figure it out. It's just impossible for me to believe that these 2 defenses made that big of a leap in year 1 with new coordinators. Maybe they did. And both of these offenses will turn out to be really, really good, which means that both of those defenses are really, really good because that was a low-scoring game. They didn't even, it was like half of the total points scored that the over-under was in the 60s. They struggled to get to 40 total combined points in that game. So I need to see these teams play some more, but the reality is, even though I didn't have LSU ranked nearly as high as the AP or the coaches poll, I still had them ranked. I had LSU at, I think, 19, and I had Southern Cal unranked. So Southern Cal beat the team I had 19 by 10 points. I have to rank them. So I moved them to 18. I moved LSU down to 22. Now, for all I know, these are 2 top 15 teams. For all I know, both of these teams will finish 8-4 or 7-5 and unranked. I need to see them play more games, but this is where I've landed for this week. Southern Cal at 18, LSU at 22. LSU plays Nicholls State this week. Southern Cal plays Utah State, so it should be 2 blowouts this week for both of these teams. I've got Kansas at 19. That's up a couple of spots. Not because of anything they did. It's because of other teams falling. NC State, I dropped. Clemson, I dropped. LSU, I dropped. So some of the teams I had 20 to 25 moved up by default. Kansas was one of those teams. They looked good this week. I think they're going to be good this season. They beat Lindenwood, which is something I've never heard of before. I thought that was the quote-unquote nervous hospital from the Sling Blade movies, Lindenwood. This week they play at Illinois. Back to my point about these blowouts in week 1, you're probably thinking, well, Kansas is going to, they'll destroy Illinois. And maybe they will. But Illinois beat somebody 80-0 last week or something like that. So again, to the Tennessees and the Arkansas and the Ole Misses and the Auburns of the world, these fans who have been hounding me for 2 days, wanting me to rank them in the top 10 because they won by 70 points against a nobody last weekend. Do you also want me to put Illinois in the top 10? I mean, you gotta make it make sense for me here. So we'll see. If Illinois goes out and beats Kansas, then they probably deserve to be ranked instead of Kansas. But for now, I've got Kansas at 19. I've got Arizona at 20. Boy, that quarterback and wide receiver duo they have might be the best wide receiver quarterback duo in the country. Now, there are teams with better quarterbacks, and there are teams with better groups of wide receivers, Ohio State, whatever, down the list. But those two are like sharing a brain. They're like Siamese twins that have been separated, and somehow each knows what the other is thinking. That receiver went for 300 and something yards. Fafita is an amazing quarterback and one of the most exciting players in all of college football to watch. I tried to get people to watch Arizona games last year. They wouldn't do it. Watch an Arizona game. If you don't care about Arizona, fine. If you don't care about the Big 12, fine. Watch a half of Arizona. Just watch that kid play. That kid is a lot of fun to watch play. And in an age where everybody is looking for the bigger paycheck through NIL or transfer portal or whatever. This Fafita and this wide receiver here at Arizona, they had every reason to transfer. They were on a good team last year with a good coaching staff. That coaching staff up and quit to take the job at Washington. They would have been 2 of the highest, most sought-after recruits in the entire portal, that quarterback and wide receiver, had they entered the portal last year. They both decided to stay together as a duo at the school they committed to, and I was glad to see that pay off in week 1. We'll see how they progress over the course of the year. I'm not convinced Arizona is a good enough team overall to win the Big 12. We'll see, but that quarterback and wide receiver is going to be tough for anybody to handle, and a lot of fun to watch. I've got Arizona at 20. I've got Iowa at 21. 40 points they scored. New offensive coordinator, Kirk Ferentz, finally got rid of his son as OC and brought in a real OC that might actually know what he's doing. They appear to have a really good defense again, so felt right to rank them. They beat Illinois State 40-0. Now this week they played a rivalry game against Iowa State. This is traditionally one of the lowest scoring games in the country every single year. This game has ended in baseball scores multiple times over the last few years. I'll be curious to see if this is the year Iowa finally figures out a way to score some points against in-state rival Iowa State with a new offensive coordinator and putting up 40 points last week. We'll see. I've got them at 21. LSU, talked about them already, down to 22. Clemson, I decided to drop down to 23. I had Clemson at 16. They might be the best team in the ACC. I mean, I think Miami is. I would probably even take Louisville right now over Clemson, but, they got destroyed by Georgia. Clemson did. Georgia's probably going to do that to a lot of teams this year. I don't think it necessarily means Clemson is terrible. Now, they've got some issues, the same issues I highlighted before the game last week. Cade Klubnik is not a great quarterback. Their offensive line is not great. Their wide receivers cannot be counted on. And their secondary is inexperienced and is going to have some issues. Their front 7 is completely and totally dominant. Now, all of those things turned out to be true. They just didn't have enough to compete with Georgia and hang with them in the second half. Georgia pulled away. They play App State this week. By no means a pushover. App State, like Fresno State playing Michigan, like Boise State playing Oregon this week. App State is one of those Power 5 teams that doesn't walk into one of these big stadiums with their mouth wide open. Oh my God, look at this. This is why. They're used to this. App State lives for these types of games. They won't be intimidated, and they're not going there to collect a paycheck. They're going there to win. Now, I think Clemson will beat them. Is at home for Clemson. I think they will beat them, but they better be taking this game serious because App State is not a team to take lightly. Georgia Tech, I moved up to 24. NC State down to 25. Georgia Tech won again, this time over in-state rival Georgia State. They started a little bit slow, finished okay, beating Georgia State 35-12. And NC State, already talked about then, just a struggle win over Western Carolina. One of the most disappointing teams to me in week one was NC State. When you talk about disappointing teams so far early in the season, obviously Florida State, who's now 0-2 and probably won't sniff the top 25 the rest of the season, the most disappointing team in all of college football probably. Oregon, I thought, was extremely disappointing in week one, only putting up 24 points against Idaho, a 10-point win. Very disappointing. NC State's performance against Western Carolina, disappointing. Now, NC State's got an opportunity to right the ship, that neutral site game in Charlotte this week against Tennessee, so we'll see. But I would be extremely nervous right now if I was an NC State fan. But there you go. There's my top 25 with a little bit of an explanation about why I have teams ranked where I do. Again, I don't expect everybody to agree with my rankings 1 through 25 or any one particular team's ranking in particular for that matter, but I do at least try to explain to you why I have certain teams ranked where I do, because that's a big complaint I hear about some of the other polls and rankings that are out there, is that there's just no explanation provided. They just, this team's here, this team's there, and I'm not telling you why. It's just, it is what it is. Well, I tell you why, at least. Again, knowing that, of course, there's going to be some disagreement. But I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know down below what you think, what I get wrong here. Let me know, and I'll talk to you again soon. Have a good morning.